Hello again and welcome to At the Roundtable. I'm Steve Kime with the City of Enid. My special guest today is Shelby Rowe. Shelby's from Oklahoma City, and her title is a Suicide Prevention Program Manager. And here in the fall time of the year, we're talking about suicide prevention awareness, if you will. And in preparation, Shelby, and again, thanks for being here with us, suicide is a major public health concern. The number said over 40,000 people die by suicide each year in the United States, and is the 10th leading cause of death. So right off the bat, Shelby, and again, thank you for coming up from the city to Enid today.
Yes.
Just tell us about your role here in the state of Oklahoma.
So my role in the state of Oklahoma, I work for the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, and I am a Suicide Prevention Program Manager. With that role, I oversee the Department of Mental Health, our activities and programs aimed towards reducing suicide and suicidal behavior among our young people, and helping to make sure that we've got a good, strong safety net for individuals at risk.
Can you tell me about the size of your staff? Because I think most people watching said, well, yeah, suicide is a big deal, it's a concern, but they may not be aware of the significance of the problem here in Oklahoma, which we'll find out in a moment. So how large is your staff?
So my staff is very small, which is about how things are nationwide. Although suicide is, a leading public health concern in our country and the 10th leading cause of death, the resources that get spent on suicide pale in comparison to other public health issues. Sure. I have two staff members. I have a community outreach field representative and a school-based outreach field representative. We are fortunate in Oklahoma that we received an additional federal grant for adult suicide prevention called the National Strategy for Suicide Prevention, and that program has two staff members as well. So although it is a large public health epidemic that affects over 800 Oklahoma families a year, wow, that lose when they live to suicide, there's not a lot of resources. So a lot of passion and a lot of creativity to address a major problem and to help save lives.
Well, we'll talk in a few moments about the impact it has on Oklahoma. Here in the fall time of the year, it seems like there's the importance to designate, suicide prevention awareness. Why is it this time of year that there's that real direct emphasis?
I think it's because for so many Americans, especially students, this is the time they're going back to school. Either, starting school, starting college, moving. Right. Major life transitions tend to happen in the fall for young people. And so by focusing on suicide prevention in September and getting a good awareness message out and saying, hey, you may be struggling with these transitions, but help is available. You may be noticing a friend that's struggling. Here's how you can help. But it seems to be a good time when there's major life transitions. Sure, for a lot of Americans, starting a new high school, starting a new college, moving away from home, that September is a good time to look and see that you do have a safety net and see what resources are available in your community if you ever need them.
You talked a little bit about some of the warning signs. You just briefly touched on it there a moment ago. And I think if you interview a lot of individuals, I don't know if it's half and half, but maybe one half would say, I never knew, I had no idea if someone was suicidal. And then the other half would say, yeah, I noticed there was something going on and maybe we could have done more or something. Can you tell us, are there key suicide signs or warning signs for suicide?
There are warning signs. But
I don't know if it's easy to group them or not, but.
Right. There are some that we'll group, but I will say, to be easy, we'll list some out. But one would be trust your gut. If someone if something's just not right, trust your gut. Your instinct of knowing when someone that you care about is in crisis works. We can discuss some of them individually. There are, going through a major life transition is a risk factor. When you're disconnected, and this can be for our military servicemen, our veterans, when they're coming home and getting discharged, their environment is changing, their role is changing, and so that transition can put them at risk. Retiring, moving to a new town, when you're disconnected And in the process of reconnecting, you don't have all those social supports you normally have. So it can make you more vulnerable if something happens.
I think we all can maybe point to a time in our life that maybe things didn't go our way, everything wasn't picture perfect, and maybe we were borderline in a depression mode or something like that, or in mood. And I don't know how much further a person would need to go past depression, but that leads into my question. I guess depression has a big part of maybe the avenue to lead to further things regarding considering suicide.
The research shows that 90% of those who die by suicide have a treatable mental health condition at the time that they die. It may be undiagnosed, untreated, or undertreated.
Let's back up for a minute,
Yes.
Shelby. What would be your definition then as a treated mental health condition that you just said?
So it can be the most common mental health condition in our country is depression.
Okay.
So depression plays a huge role. But we have to keep in mind most people who have depression don't die by suicide. So although most people who die by suicide are experiencing depression or have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, other mood disorders,
Okay.
substance use, substance abuse, anxiety, other mental health conditions that treatment is available. I always preface with treatment because, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, we didn't have a lot of effective treatment methods when it came to treating someone at risk for suicide. Now we do with research. And so to make sure that everyone knows it is treatable. It is a significant health condition, but recovery is possible and treatment is available. They've come a long way with medications and different therapy models to help individuals at risk to recover. That it is a different phenomenon. It is closely tied to depression, but it is its own condition.
Sure.
But yeah, and a sense of loss. You mentioned, when people, it can be the loss of a job, the loss of a relationship. It can be a financial loss.
Because it all impacts us differently. You'll see another person, okay, it'll work out, it'll turn out. Then the other individual perhaps just didn't recover. So.
Right, and it's a cluster. It's a really complex phenomena. You can almost think of it, those barometer things that have the different bubbles going at different levels. We each have, a genetic background, things that we bring with us, with our genes that we don't get to pick our families. We don't pick that. So there are some genetic predispositions for mental health conditions. There are historic events in our life. Trauma plays a huge role in increasing someone's risk of suicide. Someone who's experienced at least 5 traumatic events as a child, through the Adverse Childhood Event Study, if their ACEs score is 5 or higher, they have almost a 1,000 times greater risk of dying by suicide than someone with an ACEs score of 0. So those past life experiences that can really affect our ability to cope with future things. Because of the strain that's put. More research has shown that trauma changes the brain. Child abuse, rape, domestic violence, it literally changes your brain composition. And so without proper treatment, without proper care, that's going to put you at a lifetime greater risk for all sorts of health conditions because your brain chemistry has been changed by that early childhood trauma.
Very good. My special guest today here at the Roundtable is Shelby Rowe. Shelby is the Suicide Prevention Manager with our office in Oklahoma City. And with her small staff, they support the state of Oklahoma, if you will. We'll have more with Shelby in a moment. When we come back, we're going to talk about how suicide impacts Oklahoma and a little bit about the suicide nationwide impact. Are there certain parts of the country that's higher risk for suicide than others? And we'll talk about that here at the Roundtable. But first, let's take this short break. Welcome back to At the Roundtable. My special guest today, Shelby Rowe. Shelby, again, the Suicide Prevention Program Manager in her offices in Oklahoma City. I'd like to mention, as you're watching this program, a 800 number I'd like to share at this time. It's the nationwide suicide prevention number, and it's 1-800-273-8255. That is 1-800-273-8255. We'll mention that phone number later on in our interview with Shelby. Okay, let's talk about our backyard here in Oklahoma. Doing some research for our visit today, Shelby, I guess I never did really give it any thought about rural Oklahoma versus an Oklahoma City and Tulsa. Tell us a little bit about suicide rates compared to small town Oklahoma versus big city Broken Arrow or Tulsa. There is a difference, right? There's a different rate?
There is a difference. And, you know, we mentioned earlier the link between mental health and suicide. And some of the risk is just access to care. Individuals in rural Oklahoma and in rural America in general are at greater risk. Their death rates statistically are higher than in the bigger cities for a couple of reasons. And it's not that being in a small town makes you more depressed, you know, but you don't have the access to care that someone in Oklahoma City, if they're going through a mental health crisis, they can't afford to, you know, they can go see a therapist on their lunch break and come back to work. Where if you live in rural Oklahoma, you may have to take half a day off of work. And for most Oklahomans, that's just not something you can afford. You can't afford to treat your health condition. So I would look at it the same if you had diabetes and you had no access to an endocrinologist, your survival rate's going to be lower than someone that has easy access. You know, where mental health care is dramatically underfunded in our state and in other states, and funding's at risk. And so having access to well-trained healthcare professionals really makes an impact on survival rate.
Let's move from Oklahoma to nationwide. I know Oklahoma rates sometimes in the education rankings like 46, 47 out of 50 states, kind of at the bottom of the list. Smoking is, you know, same way. Our overall health is not the best here in Oklahoma, so our numbers are not to brag about. But are there different areas of the country? You know, sometimes you see that Colorado is a healthy state. People are biking and hiking and stuff like that in those kind of rankings. Are there different areas of the U.S., the country, that would be, let's say, less suicide rate of incidents versus other parts of the country?
You know, the states that have the lower rates for suicide would be states like New York, New Jersey, some of those northeastern, for a couple different reasons. We've already mentioned, you know, access to health care. There, I lived in New York City for a couple of years, and one day I was curious at work, and I did a search for mental health professionals in my area. And just within 2 blocks of my office, there were probably 40 different mental health professionals, and I could get appointments from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Did the same search, you know, for a rural town in Oklahoma, and there might have been 4 therapists within a 90-mile radius.
Wow.
So that's different. But then also in a larger city, you're more protected by just your fellow citizens. If you are in a mental health crisis, if you are experiencing a psychotic episode, someone is going to see you and know and be able to intervene. They will recognize you're in crisis and help you. Where if you are on your farm in Oklahoma, you live by yourself, and things are not going well, you're very isolated, and the chances of someone else, of a helpful, friendly bystander noticing, hey, you're not okay, do you need help, is just less likely. You know, think if you had a heart attack in the middle of Walmart, your chance of surviving is a lot greater than if you have a heart attack, you know, out on your tractor in the pasture, because there's just no one around to help.
Or
so
the hay barn
larger
by
cities,
yourself, sure.
yeah, and so when you're by yourself and going through a mental health crisis, that isolation can be fatal. So for those that have those mental health conditions or that have been struggling, a big advantage of rural communities is you can really get connected, that sense of community pride, Get involved with your civic organizations, volunteer at your school, at your local church. Those connections with other caring people can be life-saving.
Does the weather figure into this? Let's say when you're in Alaska and it's dark 20 out of 24 hours versus sunshine Florida or as Arizona. Do you know if there's any studies that have been done weather-related, dealing with the bright sunshine versus night all the time?
So they've done some looking at different things, and they don't have good conclusive, but some,
Okay.
the higher the altitude, but then some of it's also the isolation. So being able to
Okay.
separate out, there are no large blossoming communities up by the North Pole. So there are different factors, isolation and access to care. If you live in Alaska, your entire town may have one mental health professional that's in your town one day every 6 weeks that flies in. So there's other risk factors of living there.
Sure.
But the time of the year when most suicide deaths take place is the late spring, early summer.
Interesting.
So,
And not the holidays.
Right,
It's
it's not the
interesting,
holidays.
some of the conversation I have at the office during the fall, or when we fall back, we set our clocks back, and time we leave the office and go home, it's dark. And it's interesting, the conversation in the office during the fall is, yeah, it gets dark too early, and I don't feel like doing anything, and just how people react to the weather and time change. One thing that has taken place in the last several years, when you see the term suicide, that you also see the term veterans next to that. And anywhere, I guess you see from 12 to 20 veterans a day, suicidal deaths. Let's focus on Oklahoma. What do you know about that ratio, and how are veterans doing here in Oklahoma?
So in Oklahoma, we are tracking pretty much at the national average, which is not necessarily a good thing, in that about 20% of our suicide deaths are veterans, ranging in age, of course, from 20 to 85. But about 20% of the deaths by suicide are veterans. Now, keep in mind also, for our state and nationwide, about 80% of all deaths by suicide are male. And so since the veteran population is predominantly male, that does put them at a high rate. But there are certain things about being a veteran and in the military culture that could put you at greater risk. One, you are the help giver. You are the person who helps others. You have devoted your life to protecting freedom.
Sure.
And so you're not as likely to reach out for help for yourself. You are the help giver, not the help receiver. And so there are some barriers that the military is doing phenomenal things at the state level and the national level of providing good, innovative programs and encouraging so that when a veteran or their family member does reach out for help for them, that help is there. If you call that number that we had mentioned earlier, 1-800-273-TALK, if you're a veteran, you can press 1 and it gets you linked up immediately, with someone that can help you to get linked up with the VA healthcare system. The veterans are doing a good job of creating a good safety net, but there are different things in the transition. If you're a soldier, you're moving every few years, or you're being deployed away from your family. And so whereas experiencing a loss or moves or these major life changes, that's part of what our veterans, what our military population does to
Sure.
keep the rest of us safe. And so it keeps their life in perpetual change. And so oftentimes they don't have those stronger roots and connectedness, or they're very close with their unit, with their troops, with their battle buddies, and then you come home and you have that sense of isolation because you've been so close and so supportive with a team of individuals that have your back, and then to come back home to the civilian world can be really isolating.
Whole sense of new dynamics.
Yeah.
Well, let's move from the topic of veterans and let's talk about the youth suicide prevention initiatives. It's the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health Substance Abuse Services. It's a long acronym for that. So youth suicide prevention initiatives, what are those?
Yes, we've got a lot of exciting things happening that I'm really happy to be overseeing, of really trying to build a good safety net. Everything from, raising awareness at the community level, and talking about means restrictions. Having just a safe home, making sure one of the things that we do is distribute medication deactivation packets, that if you've got expired prescriptions or things that you don't need and you don't live close to a prescription drop box, you can get one of these packets. You put your meds in there, add some water, it's got charcoal, it deactivates the medication so it's not around for anyone to misuse. We also distribute gun locks to have to keep a home safe. That someone in crisis, just to create that barrier.
Excuse me, Shelby. Where can they find these initiatives? Is it on your website? If somebody's is just getting in on the last part of our interview and they hear the gun locks and about the medicines, things of this nature, where can they read that or see this information? So
they can reach out, and we're in the process of updating our website, so they can visit the website at ok.gov/ODMHSAS, or they can just send me an email, and I can get them linked up with my community outreach person that can help them get in contact with a local group. We partner with organizations around the state. Several of the VA facilities and law enforcement offices also have gun locks, so we can help get them in touch. And it just creates that extra layer of safety for people in your home.
I can see where our topic on suicide prevention could be a day-long visit, if you will, but I have a few more questions. And again, our special guest here at the Roundtable today is Shelby Rowe, the Suicide Prevention Program Manager, and her office is in Oklahoma City. 20th and Classen, I think, that you said were your new location. And again, the nationwide suicide prevention number is 1-800-273-8255. 1-800-273-8255. Well, we're going to take a short break, and we have a couple more questions for Shelby, so thank you for staying with us at the Roundtable today. Thank you for staying with us at the Roundtable today. My very special guest from Oklahoma City is Shelby Rowe. Again, Shelby is the Suicide Prevention Program Manager here in Oklahoma, making a trip up to the Enid Television Network studios today. And as you can tell, we could have a lengthy conversation about suicide prevention, but we want to keep in mind some of the phone numbers and some of the websites, and we'll repeat those in just a few moments. Shelby, many years ago, I had a running friend. There were several of us that would meet and go for long runs and kind of a training group. And I remember one evening he just didn't feel right, if you will. And we got to talking, the other people were running, and we were doing like a 7-8 mile run. So it was just the two of us together. And the more that he talked, he told me that he had, I think it was an uncle that had committed suicide, and it was on that particular day, but many years before. So on, I'll just say September 20, in years past, that was that suicide date. And so that was the first time that I realized how it impacted a family member of those left behind, and this was his uncle. And when that date rolled around each year, he just wasn't the same person. He was a very physically fit runner and all that, but there was an emotional, mental part about him that he was disappointed, he was somewhat depressed, he was just hurt. So I guess for those, well, I guess the question is, how does suicide impact those that are left behind? I guess that's normal for him, right? And that was my first exposure to it. I had no idea.
So losing someone you love to suicide is a very complicated loss. And it was put very eloquently to me by a friend of mine who had lost her husband to suicide. And she told me that he was the victim and perpetrator of the most violent crime she could ever imagine, and she had every emotion that went with that. Mm-hmm. When you lose someone to suicide, I said there are a lot of complicated emotions, and unfortunately, we as Americans, Oklahomans, when something feels awkward and we're scared we're going to say the wrong thing, that we say nothing at all. And so these individuals oftentimes are left to grieve alone and not have the chance to to really process that loss as if they had died from other natural causes. So what I recommend for anyone that knows someone that lost one to suicide, they lost their loved one. That is the focus. So do exactly what you would do if they had lost someone they loved in a car wreck, if they had lost someone they loved to a heart attack or cancer. Make a casserole, make cookies, go by, check on them. When it's that person's birthday, or the anniversary of the death, just you would go, hey, I know this, do you want to go grab a coffee? Do you want to, if they lost a high school student and that student was in the band, the next band concert, go, hey, I was thinking about Tyler tonight, and how he liked to play the trumpet.
Sure.
Do you want to go grab a coffee? Just be a good neighbor, be a good friend, and help them. Give them the opportunity to talk about, they may be really angry that day. They may want to tell you how mad they are at them for dying. Just give them permission, time and space to heal can be really helpful. And there's community events. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is a national organization, and we're fortunate to have a chapter here in Oklahoma. They hold a couple of events each year for suicide loss survivors. One are Out of the Darkness walks that are all over the state. Your viewers can visit afsp.org and find out where a walk is. They also host at different places. I'm not sure if there's one in Enid. I know there'll be one in Tulsa and Oklahoma City. On the Saturday before Thanksgiving, it's International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day. And there are gatherings all over the world where individuals who have lost one come together to remember their loved ones and share tips for hope and healing and how to get through. So there is a community available. So I'd recommend anyone, if you've lost someone, at the Department of Mental Health, we also provide what we call eye care packages. That if you visit our website, again, ok.gov/ODMHSAS, just look for suicide prevention. You can request an eye care package that comes with a couple books and tools and resources to help someone cope. So if you've lost someone, you can request one for yourself, or if your coworker has just lost their child or their spouse, you can request an eye care package for them, and we'll get some resources out to them.
Very good. Well, I knew you'd be a wealth of information, and you certainly are, and it's obvious that we're going to have you come back to Enid.
Would love to come back.
So we can talk a little bit more about that, but we've got to close out the program today. Again, here at the Roundtable, our special guest, Shelby Rowe, Suicide Prevention Program Manager for the state of Oklahoma with her office in Oklahoma City. A couple key places to reach out to. As Shelby said, you could always call 911. And there's the nationwide suicide prevention number, which is 1-800-273-8255. 800-273-8255. Shelby, nice meeting you. Thanks for the work that you do. I know it's work that you're making a difference, and we'll have you back in the near future because we just seem like we just touched on the surface, and there's a lot more that we can do. So thank you again for being here. And thank you for joining us here at the Roundtable. Again, it's our privilege to provide informative information about a variety of things in our lives here in Enid, Oklahoma, and across the state of Oklahoma. So thank you for joining us here at the Roundtable. I'm Steve Kime with the City of Enid. Until next time, make it a great day.